There are far too swimmers that have absolutely wonderful skills until they breathe. And unfortunately, to create the energy they need to swim fast and to stay alive, swimmers have to breathe. More than any other skill, breathing has the potential to disrupt alignment, to disrupt propulsion, and to disrupt timing. If swimmers can't get their breathing on track, they're always going to struggle. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. Swimmers have to improve their breathing if they want to improve their swimming. And in freestyle, it's an absolutely critical skill. Far too many freestyle strokes are ruined by bad breathing. And if swimmers can improve their breath, they're going to be able to execute all their other skills more effectively. To keep things simple and extremely practical, there are 3 skills that swimmers need to execute in freestyle in order to have great breathing. They need to breathe low, they need to breathe straight, and they need to breathe fast. If swimmers can figure out how to do all 3, they're going to have a great breath that creates speed. Let's check it out. First up, let's take a look at a head-on shot because it becomes very obvious to see how important a good breath is. So if we watch this swimmer here, she's going to take a breath, and the first thing to notice is that look how straight the breath is. The head doesn't pull to the side, the head doesn't move to the side, the body doesn't move to the side. Everything is really straight when she takes that breath, and that's going to allow her to minimize the disruption of her alignment, which would really negatively impact her speed. And then the second thing to watch here is that the breath is really low. She's not lifting the head to breathe. She's just rotating. The head obviously has to come up a little bit, but she's not really picking the head up in order to get the breath. She's rotating the head to the side, lifting just enough, and then getting her breath. And then the last thing to pay attention to is how fast the breath is. She moves the head fast there, and she gets it back down in time for the entry of the stroke. And so she's breathing fast, she's breathing low, and she's breathing straight. And that's going to allow her to create as much speed as possible. So what are some of the consequences of not executing those skills? Well, if she breathes high right here instead of low, just like a teeter-totter, the head goes up, the hips are going to go down, and that's going to have a negative impact on her body position. But not only that, when she breathes here, if she was to lift the head up, she's going to press that hand down at the same time in order to create some stability, and that's going to disrupt her pull as well. So not only has she disrupted her alignment when she lifts that head to breathe, she's going to disrupt her pull as well. And obviously this swimmer is not making that mistake, and so she doesn't have those problems. So just by lifting the head, that can be really problematic for swimmers. The other issue is that if she were to pull her head to the side, that's going to cause a ton of problems as well. So if we watch here, she's going to take the breath on this stroke right here. Now imagine she had pulled her head all the way to the side, all the way to her right shoulder to the left of our screen. If that was the case, her whole body is going to move in that direction as well, which is going to create a ton of resistance. But not only that, this arm right here is entering about shoulder width, right where it wants to be. But if she pulls her head to the side, that arm is either going to do one of 2 things. It's going to come along for the ride, so this arm is going to be way over across her body, or to counteract that pull, she's going to press the arm out to the side to her left, so it would go out right there really far instead of just kind of going straight back like it does. And that's going to really disrupt her pull as well. So not only does it disrupt her alignment, it disrupts her pull in both cases. Whether she lifts the head up or she pulls it to the side, we've got double trouble in every case. And then the last piece is the speed component. And if she breathes slow, she's just going to magnify the impact of those mistakes. Her body position is going to be worse, and her propulsion is going to be worse. And so the speed of the breath becomes really important because it magnifies or minimizes any negative consequences of a poor breath. And the last reason that the speed of the breath is really important is because the breath has to get back down fast in order to set up an effective pull after the breath. So if we watch her take her breath here, she's going to get the head back down by the time the arm gets about right under the shoulder, right there, and that's going to allow her to be in a really strong position. If she was still rotated, like right here, and she has to execute her whole pull, which happens with a lot of swimmers, unfortunately, she's going to be pulling in a really weak position, and so she's going to lose a lot of that pull. But she gets back down in line there, right through the meat of the pull, and that allows her to be in a strong position to create a lot of propulsion. So if we watch this swimmer here, what we'll see is that the breath is staying relatively low. He's not driving the head down. He's got to lift the head to breathe, and he's getting it right back down right away. He's got a little bit of an up and down motion to him, but if you watch the hips, they're not moving around too much, and so he's doing a really good job of keeping his body position in line through the breath, even if he's lifting up a little bit more than the previous swimmer. The other thing to pay attention to from a timing standpoint is that right there, you can see the head is back down in line. His arm hasn't passed under his shoulder, and that's going to allow him to get a really strong pull and to be in position to pull really effectively. And so again, the arm is passing right under the shoulder, but the body is now flat to the water again because he got his head back down, and that allows him to be in a really strong position. And he's able to use the strongest muscles in order to power the biggest part of the pull. And so by breathing at the right time, getting back in line, getting the head back down in time for the pull is going to allow him to get a lot more out of that. And by breathing straight, by breathing low, and by not delaying the breath, he's able to keep his alignment in check and create a lot of propulsion with each stroke. So we'll watch one more swimmer here, and we'll pay attention to the three aspects again: the speed, the height, and then the side-to-side motion of the breath. And if we watch right here, she's keeping that head low. You can almost always see part of her cap. She's not picking the head up. She's just turning the head to get a breath. There's going to be a little bit of an elevation, but that's because she needs to clear the water, but she's not lifting the head up, and it's not affecting her body position. You can see she's barely just sneaking a breath, and you can still see part of her cap when she takes that breath. And the other thing to pay attention to is that there's no side-to-side motion with the breath, and more importantly, there's no side-to-side motion with the body, or in reaction, side-to-side motion with the arms. And so she's doing a really great job of breathing straight, which is allowing her to keep resistance low and maintain really great propulsion with each stroke too. Lastly, from a speed standpoint, she's getting the head back down fast. She's taking the breath fast. And if we watch here, by the time the head gets back in line, she's ready to get right into the power position of the pull, and then she's flat to the water, and then she can execute that pull through the back part of the stroke in a position that's really strong. And so she's not breathing late, and she's breathing pretty fast, and that's going to allow her to maximize the effectiveness of the breath and minimize the negative consequences of the breath. And so 3 skills that are really important for swimmers to go fast with great breathing: keep it low, keep it straight, keep it fast, and they're going to be on track. Effective breathing is absolutely critical for fast breaststroke. And effective breathing is all about getting air in a way that minimizes the amount of resistance swimmers create when they breathe. If swimmers can breathe in a way that allows them to still create a lot of propulsion while getting the air they need and minimizing the resistance they create, they're going to be able to race with a whole lot more speed. Breathing is a skill in breaststroke that many swimmers struggle with. They either struggle to breathe in an effective way, they struggle to recover from the breath quickly and effectively, they struggle to breathe at the right time, or they do all 3. We'll cover what needs to happen to breathe effectively, we'll cover what needs to happen to recover from the breath effectively, and we'll also discuss timing of the breath and the breath recovery. Let's check it out. So the key skill we'll watch for here is whether the hips drop during the breath. And so what we'll see is right here, those hips are staying right in line the entire time. And so this swimmer is able to execute that breath without letting the hips drop. And so when swimmers are ineffective with the breath, they tend to come straight up. And in this position here, you'd see the hips drop down beneath the surface of the water. And that's going to create a ton of resistance and a ton of drag, and that's ultimately going to slow them down. So if swimmers can find a way to breathe, just like this swimmer, in a way that allows them to keep the hips up without dropping the hips, they're going to be able to create a lot more speed. We'll be able to see the same thing here in this swimmer. Now, if you watch the breath there's not going to be really any drop of the hips as she takes that breath. If there is, it's going to be really small, but as she breathes here, she's coming up, the hips are staying up, and then she's getting back into line. And so doing a really good job of keeping the hips up through the breath, which is absolutely critical for keeping resistance low. If those hips drop, resistance is going to go up, speed's going to go down. The second thing to pay attention to here is the timing of the breath. And so what we'll see is that the breath tends to happen, and this happens in most swimmers, is that as the upper body starts to rise, as the pull happens, so right about here, that's where the breath starts to happen, and it happens fast. It's not a slow, patient movement. Once the breath starts to go, it happens fast, because if swimmers start lifting the head early, then they're going to be creating more resistance than they need to, so the longer they can wait for it, the more effective they're going to be. But once the upper body starts to come up, once they start to pull right there, that's where the breath needs to happen. And so it has to happen within the rhythm of the body. So she's breathing with her body. She's lifting as the body lifts. That's when she's going to take that breath. And the more effective she can be with that, the more effective she's going to be at delaying the breath to the point where she has to breathe, but not get out of line any sooner. And the faster she can make that breath happen. So we'll see the same thing with this swimmer here. As she pulls through, that's where the breath happens. With the rising of the chest, the rising of the head, everything comes. And so as she starts to pull back, that's where the breath happens. And right when she gets everything set up right there, that's where you really start to see the rise. And so in some ways, she's using the pressure on the water to lift herself up from that position. But that's when the key timing element needs to happen, is when the breath comes up, is when the pull really starts in earnest. That's when the breath's going to happen. So rather than breathing earlier and disrupting her alignment, she waits to the pull to really make it happen. And that allows her to wait a little bit longer, keep resistance really low for as long as possible. Now, it's also possible to breathe too late. So for example, if she was to wait, not breathe, it's probably going to compromise the pull a little bit if she waits too long. And she's going to try to have to lift the upper body without using the arms to create a little pressure down on the water. That's going to be a lot harder. And more importantly, she's going to be ready to recover the arms, but she won't have breathed yet. And that's just going to slow her down. It's just going to make sure it takes more time for her to get back in alignment. And the last thing swimmers want to do is be stuck in this position, waiting to breathe, instead of trying to get the head back down in line as fast as possible. Now, if we look at the recovery of the breath, what we'll see is the head gets back down as the hands reach full extension. So what we don't want to see is a late breath where swimmers are out in line with their hands out in front and they're still waiting for that head to come down, or even waiting for the chest to come down. And so the more that they can get the head back down in time with the arms, and the more aggressive they can be with that, the less time they're going to spend in a position like this where they're creating more resistance than they want to. So the faster they can recover from the breath and get everything back down in line, the faster they're going to be able to minimize the amount of resistance they're creating and therefore increase the amount of speed that they're creating. So we'll see the same skill with this swimmer. So again, once those hands are full extension, her head's already back in line so she can get everything back in line. And when breaststrokers are sprinting, they need to be able to do that really fast, because we'll see as this swimmer, she's going to get into the next stroke right away. So if she has to wait to get back in line, that's just going to slow her stroke rate down unnecessarily. And so the more that she can get back in line with the head and the hands at the same time, everything's going to happen faster. She can get into the next stroke cycle faster, and she's going to spend less time in this position, which is going to be creating a lot of resistance. So the faster she can get back in line, the more speed she'll create, because she can keep the rate up and she'll create less resistance. So if we take a look at another swimmer, this swimmer is going to lift his head a little bit earlier, but he's not going to breathe really until he gets into the meat of the pull, just like we saw with those other swimmers. And so again, if you watch the hips too, the hips stay up and in line. They may even come up a little bit. And again, he's driving back down, trying to get the head back down fast in time with the recovery as well. And so not spending a lot of time in this position, trying to get out of it quickly, get out of it aggressively, and taking that breath through the pull is when the body will rise, and that's when swimmers want to take the advantage of that body angle so they can get the breath and then be aggressive with getting back in line as quickly as possible. And again, throughout the breath, those hips aren't dropping. He's holding that position the whole time through, and that's going to be a really effective breath. The more swimmers can hold their position, that means they're breathing in a way that's not causing the hips to drop, and the more they can do that, the more speed they're going to create. To get a sense of the aggressiveness of recovering from the breath, we'll take a look at it over the surface, and you can see how forcefully and how much aggression they're applying to get back into line as fast as they can and really drive everything forwards. And the same thing with the breath itself, you'll see that they're breathing forwards as opposed to just straight up. It's a forwards and up motion, and that's what's going to allow them to keep the hips up in line. So if they can breathe forward and up through the breath, that'll keep the hips up. But if they just breathe straight up, that's going to cause the hips to drop. And so more swimmers can be aggressive with going forward with the breath and then forward with the recovery of the breath. That's going to minimize the disruption of the alignment. That's going to get them out of those positions as quickly as possible, get them back in alignment as much as possible. And just as importantly, it's going to allow them to keep the stroke rate up so that they don't have to wait for the breath, especially in a sprint race like this. They can get right into the next stroke cycle, having already established their line again. And that way they can keep resistance low while still keeping the stroke rate really high. Great breathing in butterfly is key for fast swimming. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Great butterfly breathing comes down to 3 important skills. Swimmers have to breathe low, they have to breathe fast, and they have to breathe at the right time. In every Olympic race that features butterflies, swimmers are going to have to breathe. It's either over 100 meters or 200 meters, and they need the air in order to power their swimming. And so if swimmers can't master the breath, they're really going to struggle to compete successfully in butterfly. And so good breathing is something that we have to help them develop. Fortunately, breathing well is not particularly complicated. Ultimately, it's very simple, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy for swimmers to do. With a better understanding of what they do need to do, we can start to develop strategies to help them improve their breathing. So let's take a look at some butterfly breathing that is fast, low, and happens at the right time. So the key things to watch for are that the breath is low, the breath is fast, and the breath happens at the right time. What we will definitely be able to see here is that the breath is fast and that it's happening at the right time. And we'll check out some overwater shots to see how low the breath is. And while overwater shots are best to see how low the breath is, we can also get a sense of it based upon how high the chest rises up in the water, and we can definitely see that under the water. So if we watch here, what we'll notice is that the breath is going to happen as the swimmer pulls. And so as the swimmer really starts to apply pressure backwards and to some extent downward, that's going to allow them to lift the chest and get that breath and make it happen fast. So with each breathing stroke, he's breathing right when he really initiates the pull, and then he's getting the head back down either ahead of time of the hands or at the same time as the hands. And so right there, the head's in the water before the hands. And again, it's a timing issue. The sooner he can get the head back down, the less resistance he's going to create in this position here. And just as importantly, he can get into the next stroke cycle a little bit faster. So breathing through the pull here, getting the head back down as fast as he can. And that's going to allow him to, one, keep the resistance low and keep the stroke cycle rate up. So 2 really important aspects of effective breathing are making it happen at the right time and then getting the head back down in time in order to keep the rate up and resistance low. So another thing to pay attention to with this swimmer is the difference between the non-breathing and the breathing strokes. That was a non-breathing one. You could see his face the whole time. And then he comes up a little bit higher on the breathing stroke, but it's not that much higher. And so there's not a tremendous difference between the two. There is a difference. He's going to lift a little bit higher, but the more he can minimize the difference between the two, the less disruption of the stroke there's going to be, and the higher he'll be able to keep his rate while keeping the resistance low, which is going to allow him to swim faster. Now, if we watch this swimmer here, we'll see similar things. So right there, that's a no breath stroke. And then here, he's going to breathe. And if you watch the breath, it's going to happen as he really gets into the meat of the pull. So when he really starts to apply pressure backwards, it's going to lift him up a little bit, allow him to breathe effectively, and then boom, his head is back down way before the hands get back in line. And again, that's going to allow him to keep the rate up, keep resistance low. So good breath there. You can see he's coming back down already. And with this one in particular, his head barely is getting out of the water. So you can just see his shoulders there, and his head's already back down low in that breath. And so he's breathing really, really low to keep his resistance low and to keep the rate up. So from a timing standpoint, breathing through the pull and then getting the head back down well ahead of the arms. And from a height standpoint, right here, he's breathing really low and he's breathing really fast. And what you'll see too with this swimmer is there's not that much difference between the non-breathing strokes right there and then the breathing strokes right there. They're very, very similar, and that's going to allow him to maintain his rhythm really, really, really well and allow him to keep the resistance low and keep the rate up and keep the speed up. So really effective breathing here because it's low, it's fast, and it's happening at the right time. And it's pretty difficult to tell which stroke is a breathing stroke and a non-breathing stroke. So this one's going to be a breath. And then this one is going to be a non-breathing stroke. And they are very, very similar. He comes up a little bit higher, but not too much. And he gets back into line really, really, really fast. And so the less of a difference there are between the breathing and non-breathing strokes, the more speed he's going to be able to create. So if we watch it over the water, what we'll see is the breath is really low. So she's barely getting her head out of the water. You can almost see her chin surfing along the water. And then she's getting the head back down before the hands enter. So her head is back down under the water right there, and then she enters the water. So when she breathes, that head's coming up well before the arms are beginning to recover, and then she's getting the head back down before the hands enter. And so breathing really low, breathing at the right times, and obviously that breath is really fast too. She's not waiting around with the head up right there. She's getting it back down fast, and she's making that happen really, really fast. So really good timing. Breathing with the pull right there, getting the head back down before the recoveries are finished, keeping the breath really low, so chin right at the surface there, and then breathing really, really fast. So it's ultimately not a particularly complicated or complex skill. It's actually quite simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy for swimmers to execute. They have to be able to breathe at the right time, they have to be able to breathe low, and they have to be able to breathe fast. If they can make that happen, they're going to be able to swim fly without the breath disrupting their stroke. And that's really what a good breath is. It's not that it necessarily adds anything to the stroke. It allows swimmers to get air without disrupting the overall rhythm of the stroke. If you want to learn more about how to help swimmers improve their butterfly breathing, check out the video below.